posted here. All right, welcome in, guys. If you are new, my name is Dr. Matt, and I'm one of America's most experienced MCAT tutors. If you have a question about, getting into med school, taking the MCAT, optimizing your applications, please feel free to drop those here in the comments, and we will go ahead and talk about med school admissions. Right now, a lot of you guys are in waiting for results from your recent application. So props to everybody who is patiently awaiting a decision from a med school. It can be exciting times. It can be obviously kind of nerve-wracking at the same time. So props to everybody who's in that waiting game right now. If you are earlier on in the track of med school or of the pre-med journey, and you're thinking of taking the MCAT, let me know what stage you're at and what you are planning to do next with your MCAT journey. All right, so we are going to keep going as we have been, just covering a real quick sort of overview of what is on the MCAT. We've been talking through the last couple sessions about the topics that are sort of the heavy hitters. I'm not a huge fan of breaking MCAT content up into specifically just the high yield versus low yield argument, because the MCAT is a very, very diverse multi-topic exam. So it's useful to just kind of be overly familiar with the really sort of dramatic and broad diversity of topics that are on the MCAT. So last off, we talked about how you need to know about protein structure. And then this time, we will keep on going through section 1 of the What's on the MCAT. So again, this is the professional official guide from the creators of the MCAT, the AAMC. If you guys are new here, welcome in. Please do feel free to drop questions in the comments about anything MCAT or pre-med related, and we are happy to have a chat about med school admissions. All right, so last time we talked about how they focus on protein structure and also on non-enzymatic protein function, and of course that's that's regarding the way that proteins are used for binding. Proteins are used for immune signaling and immune functions like antibody production. Proteins are used as motor units. Enzyme structure and function is the next big topic on the MCAT. And this includes the function of enzymes in catalyzing biological reactions. And of course, that part is something that all of you guys are probably incredibly familiar with by now. If you've had any biology, that's kind of the most discussed thing about MCAT enzyme questions, is that they talk about catalyzing reactions. Welcome in on the YouTube side also. Welcome into everybody who's jumping in on the TikTok side. Guys, if you're new here, my name is Dr. Matt. I am one of the most experienced MCAT tutors in the country. Was a 98th percentile scorer myself with 200th percentile sections. And I've been teaching and training the MCAT and doing consulting for national MCAT companies now for over a decade. So drop those questions here. The next thing on the bio topic list is enzyme classification by reaction type. They do expect you to know some of the sort of traditional enzyme categories. So like the idea that there are kinases, that there are phosphorylases. These are things, different kinds of digestive enzymes. You don't have to know absolutely everything about them, but knowing a little bit about the enzyme functions for digestion is also super useful. Don't get confused with just as an organ comment, don't get confused with the idea that the pancreas makes digestive enzymes, but also makes pancreatic hormones, because the fact that it makes insulin that goes into the blood, do not mix that up with the fact that the pancreas makes digestive enzymes, because it does both. Different populations of cells do both. So your pancreas is responsible for helping you digest food, and your pancreas is responsible for putting insulin into your bloodstream in order to help you essentially utilize the food once it gives you your blood sugar. And famously in type 1 diabetes, it is the portion of the kidney, it is the portion of the pancreatic function that is responsible for producing the insulin that fails. And so it doesn't mean that people who have type 1 diabetes have total pancreatic failure. They don't have necessarily failure of the digestive enzyme production, just the hormone producing portion. All right. The next topic is reduction of activation energy. Now, this is super, super, super simple. On the MCAT, you need to know that enzymes reduce the activation energy. Just keep in mind the way this is typically tested on the MCAT is that they like to test it in graph form. Don't forget that they like to test it in graph form. So you may be asked about that. Let me leave a little instructional comment here. Drop your questions here in the comments about MCAT studying strategy and scores, getting into med school, and more. All right. Same thing over here on this site, guys. If you have questions, don't forget to drop them in the comments. And of course, you can always find us at MCATboss.com. I'm Dr. Matt. I'm the founder of MCATboss.com. And I try to get back to everybody same day, usually within an hour or less. If you drop a line during a live, I try to get back right away as soon as the live is wrapped up. All right, next topic is the substrate and enzyme specificity. Now, the idea here is that the reason enzymes don't just randomly chew through absolutely everything is that enzymes have a biochemical signature in their active site that makes them more prone to bind to the substrate that they are specifically adapted for. And so one enzyme will have one very specific function. A racemase enzyme will very specifically alter the essentially the enantiomer conformation of its particular target amino acid. Enzymes are super specific. Not all enzymes. There are some enzymes that are sort of more general purpose. A lot of your digestive enzymes are able to break down, as long as they have access to a peptide that has a specific bond that fits there, they're able to act on it. Next one is the active site versus induced fit model. Okay, so this is a reference to the fact that the old version of how we used to think of enzymes was it's frequently called the lock and key model. It's the idea that an enzyme essentially has like a pre-conformed shape, and that this shape is just like a lock. It's waiting to interact with a substrate in a way that specifically allows the conformational sort of lineup between the active site and the substrate to be absolutely perfect, like a lock and a key. And now we know that that is not really true, right? In general, we now, instead of picturing an enzyme like it has a particular active site and then the substrate comes and locks into that active site, we now talk about it more as though it is an induced fit. And so the induced fit refers to the fact that the the enzyme has an active site, and the fit between the active site and the substrate is close enough, but that the enzyme actually has some flexibility, that peptide has some flexibility that allows it to conform better to the substrate. So they tend to be a little bit behind the times on some of the sort of enzyme biochemistry, but this is one area where they're getting a little bit more up to date on the fact that the induced fit is very much is the current model that we are following. All right, next one is the mechanisms of catalysis. So cofactors, coenzymes, water-soluble vitamins, the effects of local conditions on enzyme activity. Of course, this frequently refers to things like the pH or the temperature, which can change the activity of an enzyme. Enzymes kind of have an optimal temperature range in which they function. And if they're outside of that optimal temperature range, then, things don't function quite the same way. All right. Next section is the control of enzyme activity, including the biology and biochemistry. So, welcome in, guys. If you are new here, my name is Dr. Matt. If you have a question about the MCAT, let me know. Casey says, my sister literally just took her MCAT. Congrats. That is awesome. It's a big accomplishment to get through. And the next section says feedback regulation. Okay, so starting with the control of enzyme activity, general catalysis, the Michaelis-Menten mechanics, the cooperativity. Cooperativity is really interesting, right? It means that the sort of kinetic math works out differently when an enzyme has one of its active sites involved versus multiple, right? The ability of the enzyme to bind to something and then it changes its substrate affinity implies that it does in fact undergo kinetic changes due to cooperativity at those other binding sites. The next one is feedback regulation. Feedback regulation is one of the coolest things. It is the reason why living organisms are able to essentially function without a controller sitting there controlling how it, ramps up gene expression with one enzyme and slows down the enzyme activity for this other enzyme. Because the way that most enzymes are adapted to self-regulate so that they're not over or under doing their job is that they will bind really readily to the substrate that they're working on until they create enough product that the product then interacts with the enzyme and slows it down. And I think that is super, super cool. The next one is, let's see. So, I should say feedback regulation is the most famous ones are usually negative feedback. There are a couple that are actually positive feedback as well. So it happens. It's unusual, but it is very cool. Then we have inhibition types, including competitive, non-competitive, mixed, and uncompetitive. Make sure you know the difference between those. Regulatory enzymes, that's allosteric enzymes, covalently modified enzymes, and zymogens. The main thing you need to know here is that covalent and allosteric are different because they tend to base a lot of the questions on the difference between those two. And then zymogens are really awesome. They're when the body produces an enzyme, but in an inactive form, essentially for safety. If you think about it, it's a way to allow an enzyme to not accidentally be doing a job in the wrong place. It waits until it's in circulation, and then it snips off that extra sort of inactivating region, and then you have an active enzyme. So the zymogen form is the inactive form that gets produced first of all. All right, Jonathan says, hello, what do you think about applying with a 480 MCAT CTO and MD schools with a strong app? Please feel free to let me know a little bit more details about your situation. I will say, so the questions about the questions about the probability of getting an acceptance based on the strength of an app and the MCAT score frequently pop up with combinations of MCAT and GPA scores that span the full range, right? People scoring all the way from like a 2.5 GPA all the way up to a 4.0 GPA. People scoring from like, say, 495 all the way up to, up into the 520s. And now I have to be a little bit cautious with a question like a question asking about a 480 because the majority of the time when people ask about a score like in the 480s, not every time, but the majority of the time, the questions are not meant super seriously, because that of course is just an incredibly very low score. So that is not a score that I would obviously recommend. I would obviously not recommend an application with that. Jonathan says 3.7 GPA with over 2,000 clinical hours, 200 shadowing hours, 200 research, 1 pub, and 2,000 volunteering. Jonathan, I'm going to assume that your question is serious, and I'm going to treat it like it's a serious question and not a troll question. That is a very, 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 very low MCAT score. That is, that is close to the lowest score that a person can get. And so because of that, the only way that I can answer that seriously, is that would be just a profound mistake to apply with that, to the point that it is not just like it's not only a waste of money to apply with it. It is it's a mark against you if you apply with that. And I say this with the utmost seriousness, because I do have lots and lots of students who work with me because they're test retakers. And I completely respect that is the starting place that a lot of people are at. When I started studying for the MCAT, I essentially felt like I couldn't even finish a section. The time management was such a bad problem because I spent so much time on passages. And so I started at a score that was, in that ballpark, but I didn't take an official exam and get a score like that because I wouldn't let myself take a test if my practice exam scores were coming out that low. And so that's my concern is, if you apply with that, the schools are going to see your test score and they're going to think, man, this student has the drive, the determination, and the commitment to have thousands of clinical hours and hundreds of shadowing and research hours, and those things look really good. Like those are strong numbers for the app. And assuming that you have a really good, personal statement and essay, the other parts of the app definitely do sound, just from what you're describing, like there are, good, strong combinations of tutoring and strong combinations of shadowing and volunteering and all of that. That is great. That again, though, puts the 480 on the MCAT into even more contrast, though. It's a little bit like if somebody told you that they went to Harvard University, but then although their test scores for entrance exams are just not good, then that would be concerning. It'd be like, well, wait, how come you did get through the harder parts that took more time? Did you not spend time on the test prep, or did you spend time on the test prep and it went this badly? And it's really confusing to know without more information what exactly the scenario is. I will kind of give you, I'll answer your last couple of questions that you wrote here. And then my sort of final piece of advice would be that if you do need some serious like exam retaking help, please drop by mcatboss.com. I do offer both packages and, one-on-one, just like a la carte tutoring hours if you want to kind of get an assessment from a professional who's been doing this for over a decade, on what might have gone wrong. So please do feel free to let me know if I can help out. So the last couple of questions, so let me get through Jack's question, and then Jonathan, I'll jump back to your question in just a second. Jack says, paramedic for 5 years, thinking about switching over, only 3.5 GPA. Do I have any chance of getting in? Now, so the 3.5 and 3.7 GPA, as long as you're scoring in the mid 500s, you have a totally fine chance of getting in. Those are not considered low GPA. Those are not concerning at all. The next one is, what do you think? Okay, so Jonathan says, what do you think about the Caribbean? Let's see, bomb step 1 and step 2. Do you think matching is hard? I am going to say this seems like a troll question at this point. It obviously matching with, not passing your step exams is not something that happens. So I'm going to go ahead and let that string of questions go. But if they are meant to be serious, serious test prep is certainly a serious thing. Definitely a serious thing that you have to take advantage of and engage to. Jack Black says, haven't taken the MCAT yet. How much studying will I need for a good score? Okay. Considering my medic background. Okay. So the background that you have in, working as a medic is helpful for your app itself, because you'll be able to point out that you have done this stuff, right? You'll be able to point out that you have exposure to medicine, that you have interaction with patients. You'll be able to describe what it's like to actually hold a patient who's been in a car wreck or been involved in some kind of a traumatic injury. Those are things you can do. From the perspective of the test, from the perspective of the exam itself, being a medic will not prepare you in any way, shape, or form for the MCAT. It's not going to even sort of interact in any way, crossover in any way with anything that you have learned as a medic. Of course, as a medic, you probably know how to, resuscitate a patient. You probably know how to put on chest leads. You probably know how to cardiovert somebody. You probably know how to run a line. Like those are set up a large variety. You know how to do these really useful clinical skills, these trauma associated clinical skills, and that is great. But that the MCAT is really not like an actual NBME shelf exam where you're doing something that is about, medicine itself. It's not that. It is physics and chemistry, reading comprehension, biology, biochemistry, psychology, sociology, and by and large, these things are not medicine themselves. And so I would say the majority of students get closer to their optimal score if they put in at least 3 months. So if you need help figuring out kind of how to plan the 3 months of practice problems and then planning your 1 to 2 months of practice exams, drop a line at mcatboss.com. Elijah says, how much do med schools care about a mediocre score the first time, but then a +5 score the next time? So anything that's essentially 4 points or above in a higher MCAT score jump looks like you put in the effort and that you concentrated and that you addressed the concerns that might have plagued your first attempt. That is always great. Now, is 5 points enough is a very different issue, because if your first attempt at the MCAT was a 480 and your second is a 485, then you're probably not going to want to apply with that either. But if your first one was a 5, 5.06 and your second one was like a 5.11, then you're talking. Then you're in a great place. But again, let me know. I work with retakers all the time. Let me know if I can help out. With that, I do have to wrap up. Thank you guys for all the interactions and the follows. Jack has one more question in there. I feel like that's a dumb test to get into medical school. Yeah, it cuts both ways, right? So, I, as a person who, did terrible in my first practice MCAT and then scored really well by the end and got into a bunch of med schools, at the end of the road, now that I'm a doctor, even though I've been teaching the MCAT and helping write practice exams and explanations and consulting for MCAT companies and all that fun stuff, I can say as one of the most experienced tutors in the country for the MCAT that I essentially agree that it's not great, right? Like it tests you over content that you genuinely do not need for medical school. Like I used to run a physics lab. I used to teach undergrad physics. And I still don't think that the physics for the majority of it, with maybe a little bit of an exception for like the radioactive decay, it's good to understand radioactive decay for the radiology component of med school. Outside of that, the majority of the physics you do just isn't going to help you. The majority of the organic chemistry that you do is not going to help you. The biochemistry is relevant. The biology is very relevant, but most of that is stuff you discuss anyway later. So, it is, unfortunately, it is what it is. So while it's the system, game the system. And if you don't want to game the system that way, there is always, there's always Europe, right? Where they don't require the MCAT. The follow-up question says, I feel like I dominate candidates in A&P pharmacology and clinical. The interesting thing is that I do agree that once you get in, the people who have more exposure to anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology and clinical skills actually do have, I think, an easier learning curve, right? I do think that is a very real fact. The people who come in having, done what I did and going in from being a mathematician to being a doctor, and that it just simply is not, it doesn't prep you the same way that a person who has, been working as a medic for years is going to be prepped. So I do agree that there is a little bit, but I mean, people do fine who come in from all different backgrounds, right? People come in who are like baseball players, and people come in who are like ballerinas, and people come in who are like all kinds of we had a guy who was in his 50s who was an electrical engineer, and he didn't have anything to do with the human body or biology, and he did absolutely fine. So you can still learn it in med school. The thing is convincing them that you jump through the hoops that they wanted to. And unfortunately, that is reality. Platinum says going to a smaller college is great because the faculty are more available to allow you to obtain info. That is true. Yes, please. You can drop one last question, and we're going to wrap up here in like 90 seconds. And if you have any other questions, guys, my email is super simple. You can always drop a line at mcatboss.com. I do same-day booking discounts. If you do want to get in on a session, just let me know. And you can always email also, just replace the www right here with Matt, and it's just matt@mcatboss.com. And then the last question says 505. We're going to wrap it up here, guys. 505 on the MCAT. Should I retake? Okay. So there are some situations where people ask me this question, and I'm like, of course you should retake. Like if you got a 485, of course you should retake. If you got a 515, and I have had people ask me, when they have a 515, should they retake? And I'm like, that's insane. Don't retake. But the valley between the terrible scores and the insanely good scores is that like 504, 505, 506 range. And it is a big deal. It is a big deal to retake. And I hesitate to tell people this. You can apply, and some people will get in with a 505. It happens. And You can apply DO and probably get into a bunch of schools with a 505. You can apply broadly with a 505 to MD programs. And if you have a strong app and a great personal statement, you might get in. But yeah, of course, your options will be more broad. If you can bump up 5 to 7 points on that, then you can obviously, jump. All right, 511 says, I took the MCAT, got a 510, 514 retake, TMDSAS reapplied, but didn't get interviews. 2,000 hours clinical and non-clinical. Could there be a reason for the no interviews? I reapplied this cycle. 60 schools this time. So I will tell you that a 510 to 514, especially for the Texas app, and not getting interviews is a really shocking thing. Like that is extremely unlikely, to the point that like there should absolutely be some kind of like really crystal clear explanation for why you didn't get interview invites. Assuming that you've covered your bases and like you weren't applying like on the last day of the cycle or something crazy. So it might be, maybe. So I do tell my students if they're still applying in July, I typically don't think it's a bad thing, especially if they are applying with a better score. But even I would still be surprised to not get any invites. If you applied during August, I would just because there usually are still some seats open. But I'm happy to look over your personal statement and your apps and things like that if you want me to. I obviously understand if it's if you already applied to 60 schools and then you can't change your app now, that might not be helpful. But if it is helpful, you can jump on a session, book an hour, and MCATboss.com, and I'm happy to I have quite a few questions I grill people on whenever they tell me that they had a great score but didn't get interviews. They're not questions that we would necessarily, chew through on a live, but I'm happy to jump in on a session and we can totally chat about that. But let me know, guys, if you have any other questions, MCATboss.com, and we will see you next time. And 511, do let me know. And yes, I'm also happy to help you look through the secondaries, because if there is this, and this is the thing I'll say, I'll wrap it up here. If you have a reason that is alarming on the primaries that you need to address in the secondaries, we need to identify that and then figure out what the best optimal way to diffuse that point of concern is in your secondaries. That's incredibly